Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and prattle on about them on the internet for your entertainment. So today we're continuing our series on Lemuria, and we're leaving scientific theories behind, and we're going into the realm of spiritualism, mysticism, and just pure belief. Because what we're going to be talking about are theories and stories that cannot be physically proven or disproven. And if your belief cannot be physically proven or disproven, it's no longer a scientific belief or theory. Now, I'm going to be talking about two people here who are going to be kind of the center point of this, and both of these people will tell you that their stories about Lemuria were given to them, revealed by secret enlightened beings. And that's textbook mysticism. So, with that, let me just say, sit down, grab a drink. This is going to be a long video, and let's get to the next stage on the story of Lemuria. So we're going to start with Helena Blavatsky, and I spoke about her before in my Mystics of Atlantis video, but we're going to go back into her. And she's important because not only does she bring the idea of Lemuria away from somewhat obscure scientific theories to these more mystic spiritual beliefs, but she's also a major figure in creating what we would consider New Age belief systems today. She starts this whole turn of looking to the global East for spiritual ideas and enlightenment. And, well, when I get into her story, you're going to see a lot of the things she brings. And we're going to start on August 12th, 1831, in what is today Ukraine, but back then was Imperial Russia. That's when Helena Blavatsky was born. She was born to an aristocratic family. In fact, her maternal grandmother was a princess. Now, to clear something up here, princes in Russia, or princesses, aren't necessarily direct blood relations to the Tsar. What we call prince is actually 3 different titles in Imperial Russia. Well, 4, because the crown prince got his own special title, but details. Anyone directly related to the Tsar got to be a grand prince or princess, with more distant relations called princes of the blood. Prince was a high noble title that belonged to people who could trace their lineage back to independent rulers that were conquered or were granted that title directly by the Tsar without needing any relation. In this case, Helena's grandmother, named Helene Dolgorukov, was descended from a family that could trace their line back to a ruler who had been conquered by Ivan the Terrible. In fact, Helene was also the grandmother of Imperial Russia's first prime minister, Sergei Witter. Her father was also an aristocrat, being a member of a German noble house called the Noble House of Han. He actually served as an officer in the Russian Royal Horse Artillery, and as a result of his service, he wasn't there for her birth. In fact, he didn't see her until she was 6 months old. So this is a very old, connected family on both sides here. But enough about her family, let's get back to Helena. Now, due to her father's military career, she would move around a lot. For example, when she was 3, the family moved to Odessa for a year and then moved to St. Petersburg in 1835. It was in St. Petersburg that Helena's mother started a brief literary career, translating English novels by Edward Bulwer Lytton into Russian and writing her own works under a pen name. When Helena's father was assigned to Central Asia, the whole family had to pack up and move, though. And there, the family befriended the leader of the local Kalmyk people, a Central Asian group that practices Tibetan Buddhism. And this is where Helena was first exposed to Buddhist belief structures at a fairly young age. She would also learn horse riding from the local Kalmyk people. And she described this as a fairly idyllic time in her life, but tragedy would strike. The family was sent back to Odessa, and there, her mother caught tuberculosis and died in 1842. Helena's mother was 28, and she and her siblings would be sent to their maternal grandparents for pretty much the rest of their childhood. And this shouldn't be a political statement, but it's gonna be. You know what stops people from dying at the age of 28 from tuberculosis today? Vaccines. Go get your shots. Let me get back to the video. Sorry about that. Now, Helena would say her grandfather was a Freemason, and he had a number of books in his personal library that delved into the occult and esoteric subjects. She would also claim this is where she started having visions about a mysterious Indian man. Besides this, she was also being educated in French, art, and music, along with a variety of other subjects. All of this was designed to help her catch a husband and get married. Something that turned out to be something she had no interest in at all. She would also claim in 1844 and 1845 that her father took her to England, where she got an extensive musical education, but I have to note that no other members of her family ever make mention of this, and we have the journals of several of her siblings and other family members, so this is one of her claims, one of several of her claims you have to take with a grain of salt. Her grandfather would take her to Georgia, where she would meet other Freemasons and, according to her own writings, experience supernatural and paranormal events, including things like astral projection and having more visions. After her time in Georgia, at about the age of 17 in the year 1849, she was married to a man in his 40s, but quickly decided she didn't like being married. And to be honest, I can't really blame her. She's married to a guy old enough to be her father. She would attempt to flee several times before her husband, probably just tired of dealing with all of this, just said, you know what, go home. Go with my blessing. Be happy. Be somewhere else. She was supposed to head right back to her family, and her family did send escorts, but she ditched them and bribed a ship captain to take her to Istanbul. And this would be the start of a 9-year period where she's just running around the whole world. We don't have a lot of reliable accounts of this. We do have documentation that she toured Greece, Egypt, and Eastern Europe. We know for a fact that she spent time in Paris and London and visited the eastern parts of North America. It's during this time she claims she met that mysterious Indian man she had visions of, and she says his name was Master Moreira. And under his direction, after getting some tutelage from him, she heads to India and tries to enter Tibet, but is blocked by the British colonial government. She then heads back to Europe, goes to North America, and then returns to India by going through Burma 2 years later. And it's here in the year 1856 she claims she makes it into Tibet by sneaking through, accompanied by a Tartar shaman who was trying to get to Siberia and thought traveling with a Russian citizen might be helpful. Just in case anyone's wondering, there is no record as to whether or not that shaman ever got to Siberia. He and her split off in Tibet, and he went his own way, so I hope he made it, is all I'm going to say there. Getting back to Helena, though, she would stay in Tibet until 1858. By her account, we have no corroborating evidence of this, and returned to her family afterwards in Europe, reconcile with her husband, and together they would adopt a boy named Yuri. Sadly, they wouldn't be parents for very long because Yuri died at the age of 5. And shortly after his death, Helena suffers an accident when she falls from a horse while she's riding and suffers a spinal fracture that puts her into a coma for several months. She claims when she woke up that she had come into her full paranatural powers and had learned to control them. She then left her husband, headed to Siberia in Italy, and claimed to have studied the Kabbalah with Jewish rabbis during this period. She would leave Italy in 1867 saying that she had been called by Master Moreira and would head back to Tibet. She would be there until 1870 on what she called a spiritual retreat, being taught by people she referred to as the masters to develop deeper control over her, quote, psychic powers, unquote. I do have to note here for the record, there is no hard evidence of her ever visiting Tibet even once. And during this time period, the government of Tibet closed itself off entirely to Europeans. So, to put it mildly, the opinion of historians is rather divided on whether or not she actually did any traveling to Tibet, or whether or not half the stuff she says she did actually ever happened. So, just keep this in mind as I keep going. In 1873, Helena left Tibet and headed to New York City, where she helped establish Theosophy. As I mentioned earlier, I talk about that in my Mystics of Atlantis video, which is going to be linked in the description below. She would then write a number of books, such as Isis Unveiled in 1877. She began publishing the journal The Theosophist. But what's really important to us is that in 1888, she wrote the book called The Secret Doctrine. I'm not going to get too deep into this book. Just, this book declares that human evolution is divided into 7 stages. We're only on stage 5, by the way. Each of these stages would be embodied by a type of human group called a root race that would be divided into 7 sub-races. The first 2 races were completely non-physical in nature, with the Lemurians being the 3rd root race and the first humans to develop physical bodies. The first 3 Lemurian sub-races reproduced by laying eggs, with the 4th through 7th race giving live birth like we do today. She also pushed Lemuria much further back than Dr. Haeckel or Sclater ever did, claiming that Lemurians came about in the Jurassic era. That's right, she put the cradle of humanity right smack in the middle of the Mesozoic, aka the age of the dinosaurs. However, Helena covered a lot of ground in that book, so she didn't get into a lot of super intense detail about Lemurians. She left that to others, such as our next gentleman here. This gentleman, and I use the term very literally, is William Scott Elliot, a Scottish nobleman, merchant banker, amateur historian, and very enthusiastic believer in what Helena was preaching. But let's give you a rough go-over of what his life was like, although his life is nowhere near as entertaining as Helena's. He was born March 24th, 1849 in Edinburgh, Scotland, as the 10th Laird of Arkleton. It's kind of interesting how all these people I've talked about so far are from the upper class, isn't it? Moving forward. William attended the rugby school in Edinburgh and became an investment banker, but his real passion was the study of culture and history. He worked for the Wallace Brothers banking firm in London, and there met a lady named Maud Louise Boyle Travers, who claimed to be a psychic and was a member of the London Lodge of Theosophy. They got married in 1893, and he joined his wife's lodge, and he just dived in head first. He was incredibly enthusiastic from what I've read here. While he was a member of that lodge, he came into contact with a gentleman named Charles Leadbeater, who wins the contest of best name in this video, just hands down. He also claimed to receive astral transmissions of knowledge from Lemurian spirits, and he shared that with William, who not only believed him, but wrote it all down, combined it with his own studies based off of his reading of Helena's work, and published his own book in 1904 called The Lost Lemuria. And I read the whole thing for this video. And wow. So, let me be upfront here, guys. If you believe in this stuff, I defend your right to believe what you want, but there is no scientific evidence for this. I have checked, double checked, and triple checked. And I want to be respectful as I can, but I've reached my limit here. And as I get into it, I think a lot of you are going to understand why I reached my limit. Let me dive in a bit. William Scott Elliot is very careful to invoke the names of Sclater and Haeckel pretty often, and he kind of uses them almost as a cover to present this idea as something with scientific merit. Now, let me be clear. Coming up with a theory in this time and place that there was a sunken continent in the Pacific is plausible. We know today that that's not the case, and I don't blame Dr. Sclater or Dr. Haeckel for what happens after this. They were both working with science as they understood it, although if you watched my interview with Dr. Allen, Dr. Haeckel might have had less than innocent motives. But one of the things that really kind of grits my teeth here, and I'm starting with geography, in the book he claims that South Africa was directly connected to Australia via Lemuria from the Permian to the end of the Miocene. The Miocene ended 5 million years ago. This is impossible. And why is it impossible, and why is it important to me? Kangaroos. Let me explain. So, on the screen, you should be looking at a map showing Indonesia and Australia with a pair of lines called the Wallace and Weber lines. This is another rabbit hole I don't want to go too deep on, but I'll have some sources on them in the description. Here's the important thing, though. On one side of these lines, you have placental mammals dominating. Placental mammals are mammals like us. We give birth to live young, the whole shebang. On the other side, you have marsupials, such as kangaroos, so mammals with pouches. And on that side of the line, marsupials are dominant. And why? Because Australia has been isolated from other continents for 35 million years. During that time, marsupials were protected from competition with placental mammals. They were able to split off into a vast array of species and fill all these different ecological niches that they wouldn't be, because if a land bridge connected Africa to Australia during this period, you would see the animals from Africa coming in, and that just drastically changes what's possible in Australia. The whole biological history of Australia changes if it's not isolated. And maybe I'm being pessimistic here, but the last time we saw marsupial mammals suddenly have to deal with an influx of placental mammals, it ended badly. That was South America, which was geographically isolated until it linked up with North America. And the result of that was the number and diversity of marsupial species drastically dropped, and they were replaced by mammals from North America. Now, to give credit where credit is due, the possum not only hung in there, but was a winner and expanded its range way up into North America. So that little dude is a fighter and deserves our respect. But getting back to Australia, if it was connected to Africa from the Miocene period and only split off a couple years ago, we should be seeing animals with distinct resemblance and relations to African mammals. You know, elephants, lions, zebras. And since in Australia we instead have wombats, kangaroos, and koalas, 2 out of 3 of those are really cool animals, and the other one is a chlamydia-ridden wreck of evolution. But I gotta say, given this split in fauna, this holds no water, and it kind of puts me on the wrong foot reading this book just right out the gate. But maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on what is really just a sideshow here. What's important is the Lemurian people, right? So, he echoes Helena's claim that Lemurian humanity first appears in the Jurassic era, which is really a heck of a claim. Just in case anyone's wondering, the first recognizable ancestor of humanity that's a hominid appears about 4 million years ago, or give or take. That's a sliding scale. The Jurassic's 145 million years ago. So there has to be 141 million years of evidence that we're somehow missing. Just a tiny bit of a gap. He also claims that the first Lemurians were more animal than human, which, okay, this is the first physical iteration of humanity. I could see them not being sapient right off the bat. But here's the bigger things. He claims the first Lemurians had super soft bones, which means they could not stand upright and had to crawl along the ground. That seems problematic. He also claims they had 3 eyes, 2 in the front of the heads, just like we do, to find food on the ground, and 1 in the back of the head that he claims the pineal gland is a modern remnant of. Now, the pineal gland is actually buried way deep in your brain, and it does have some light sensitivity. It mainly governs your sleeping rhythm and produces melatonin. In certain amphibian and reptilian species, the pineal gland is a lot closer to the surface and is on the top of the head and is light sensitive, although it doesn't exactly function as an eye. I can see how he got the idea, but by the time you get to mammals, the pineal gland is like near the center of your skull. It is not going to function as a visual organ. And it's not until the 3rd subrace of Lemurians that the bones actually harden enough for them to stand upright. And when they stand upright, they're 12 to 15 feet tall. They have very elongated heels so they can walk backwards as easily as forward. But that's not what bothers me. I gotta point something out here because this is all happening during the Jurassic. On the screen, you should be seeing a marvelous and often overlooked dinosaur, the Allosaurus. He's often overlooked because most people would rather focus on the superstar that is Tyrannosaurus Rex, which fair game, but this is the Jurassic period, so this is Allosaurus' time. As you can guess from those teeth, he's a carnivore. And while Allosaurus is a North American species, he's got relatives in Asia and Africa, which means they would have access to Lemuria if it existed. And you're telling me the first 2 subraces of Lemurians crawled on the ground, were bigger than human size, and had the consistency of a chicken nugget? I'm sorry, how does this not scream slow-moving buffet to you? How exactly are the Lemurians supposed to survive long enough to develop sapience and bones and learn to walk backwards? This whole thing just falls apart the more I think about it, okay? But according to William Scott Elliot, survive they do. And I know this video is running long, but just stick with me here, guys. So, it's not enough to have boneless, 3-eyed humans who over time turn into 12 to 15 foot tall dudes who domesticate dinosaurs for hunting. Now, to be fair, that's awesome. But also can't figure out how to cure hides or how to farm. William Scott Elliot claims that what gets the Lemurians leaping from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to agriculture is that enlightened spirits from the planet Venus came to Lemuria, took on human bodies, and taught these arts of civilization to the Lemurians. And this includes stuff like weaving cloth, building houses, along with farming. And if you're like me, you're rolling your eyes. But he also claims these Venetian spirits brought wheat and bees from Venus, and wheat and bees are both non-native to Earth. And oh, wow. Okay, I know this is not a calm, dispassionate review of the book, but, I mean, this is a picture of Venus. Does this look like a place friendly to bees or wheat? And on top of that, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is honestly terrifying. It's 92 times the pressure you would feel at sea level. Just standing on Venus is like trying to stand at the bottom of the ocean unprotected. Worse, actually. It ends up with you getting crushed into a very messy, ugly pizza. There's also the heat. Venus is about 460 degrees Celsius, or 860 degrees for us egotopians. That's hot enough to melt lead! If that's not enough, the atmosphere of Venus is mostly made up of carbon dioxide, but has clouds of sulfuric acid. That's right, even going through the wrong cloud on Venus can end up with you having third-degree burns. Now, I do want to be fair to Mr. William Scott Elliot here. All those facts I just rattled off about Venus would not have been known in his time. He had no way of knowing that Venus was a literal high-pressure hellscape. That said, even at his time, there was a very good understanding of wheat and how it was related to other plants, proving that it was native to Earth. And I don't know if this was known at his time, but today, we have a pretty damn good idea of how bees evolved. They split off from predatory wasps in the Mesozoic era, about 120 million years ago, which was 5 million years after the first flowers appeared. Ironically, this means that bees would have shown up after Lemuria had been around for about 20 million years by this timeline, which is kind of funky to think about. Bees were descended from carnivorous wasps, and they would actually shift away from a carnivorous diet in favor of nectar and pollen from those flowering plants. Like I said, I don't know if they knew this back in William Scott Elliot's time, but declaring bees are from another planet when, I mean, it's pretty obvious to see that they're related to wasps and hornets and other insects. It's just, wow. And listen, I'm not going to knock you for believing anything that's not scientifically proven, folks. I believe in the death and resurrection of a Jewish carpenter over 2,000 years ago, and I believe he was literally God. So, if you want to believe in something that's not scientific, knock yourself out. But it's another thing to declare that we need to rewrite history and science, and your only evidence for this is 2 people I know saw it in a vision. Gonna need a little bit more than that. Just a little bit. That said, we're not done digging into Lemuria yet. Next week, we're going to dig into a secret brotherhood that has, in theory, been around since the 1400s. And, yeah, it's going to get wild. Since I'm rambling on about what we're going to cover next week, I think now is a good time to stop. I know this video was long, but I hope you found it informative, or at least entertaining. And if you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on the subject of future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I hope you're enjoying this series so far, man. Join me next week as we find out who the hell are the Rosicrucians and what do they have to do with Lemuria. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.